staff report as a background so that everyone has similar information in your packet.
Care to read off of this, or I can read from it, folks?
Well, there's some changes, so...
There are some changes,
yeah,
okay.
I made in my typing skills, I made a couple errors. So let me just start on page 1, and as I come across the errors, I will fix them. As you note on the background, I think the following what staff normally does when someone approaches the city about, you know, what's available for help in terms of business development. We met with them twice on December 10th and again on the 11th. And it was Joyce and I that had these meetings and took their initial request for $210,000, examined it in terms of what it meant in terms of our policy, and obviously we pointed out immediately that it exceeded the policy of $150,000. That was the normal maximum allowed. And we also talked to them at length about the number of jobs and the types of jobs they would bring to the community, and then where they might be doing this business to see if there was a tax expansion of the base or otherwise. And then it was referred to the EDA, to that committee, and they met in a special meeting on December 22nd, received a introduction from the firm itself of what they were proposing, and asked those questions, and a pretty good exchange took place at that point, whereupon Mr. Metz, the chair, appointed a subcommittee of himself, Jim Walter, Brad Waxland, and then he solicited Mr. Bunke, who was a citizen council-elect at that time, and Rodney Thompson from the chamber to serve on a subcommittee to review. And they took the policies and I think at least in 2 or 3 sub-meetings met and went through and came up with a recommendation. And I'll have Joyce explain what that is, but I just want to explain on page 2 of the report two items that need to be changed. So if you've got the page 2 in front of you, the interest is supposed to accrue from July 1, not August 1. And the date selected for the beginning of the repayment in number 4 is January 1, not July 1. Beyond that, the task force, I think, did a pretty good job of sorting through a lot of the details. They then brought their recommendation back to the full EDA. The full EDA took it under consideration at their meeting on January 12th, which was moved back in some respects to facilitate that, but also make sure we'd have council members represented on the EDA. And at that point, that board came up with a recommendation. And with that, Joyce, if you would go over what and how the agreements that you've written up in terms of working with the client.
Okay. All right. First of all, the recommendation was for $150,000 rather than a $210,000 loan in meeting the guidelines of the business subsidy criteria and revolving loan fund. With the reduction to $150,000, the applicants asked for some deferment of both principal and interest, and a compromise, you might say, was reached for 6 months interest in 2010, therefore beginning July 1, but that payments with principal and interest begin on January 1 of 2011. This makes the term actually almost 5 years, and the rate of interest was determined by checking on what prime was and then adding a 1% service fee on top of that. So that's how they got to 4.25. The loan documents include the goal of 8 jobs at a minimum of $14.42 per hour, and that translates into a $30,000 salary for the year, and that's the base rate. So the other employees will be there will be several above that rate as well. And the company has agreed to remain in Rushford for 10 years. Now, the business subsidy statute requires a business to remain in a community at least 5 years. They've made it 10 years, so we have a reference in the loan documents that says what the business subsidy statute states, but G-Force's intent to stay here for the 10 years. There was a question earlier about failure to meet goals. The business subsidy statute, and I think you have a list before you of 8 items that are required in a business subsidy development agreement. And that's being worked on with Attorney Springer in addition to the loan documents. That is something that is required by law. There is a reference in the law, and if you have that before you, it is the statute 994. On the first page are the items that are required in the agreement, and then on page 3 of 7, subdivision 6, it addresses failure to meet goals. The business subsidy agreement must specify the recipient's obligation if the recipient does not fulfill the agreement. At a minimum, the agreement must require a recipient failing to meet subsidy agreement goals to pay back the assistance plus interest to the grantor. And this is referenced in the business subsidy development agreement. And I don't think you maybe have a copy of this yet, because typically there is a tax base increase. A lot of business subsidies are done for like tax abatement or tax increment financing. In this case, we are structuring it for a revolving loan fund loan that exceeds $75,000, in this case $150,000. But in that document, we are stating that the maintenance of minimum improvements is the establishment of this business for a minimum of 5 years after the date of this agreement or the termination date, whichever is later. Borrower agrees to maintain its business operations within the city of Rushford, Minnesota for a minimum of 10 years after the date of this agreement. This document also refers to the 8 jobs at a minimum of $14.42 per hour. And it has a section on the failure to meet goals. And that's in addition to any other remedy available to the city in the case of a default. In the loan agreement, we also have the statement of maintaining existence. And I mentioned earlier we have a reference to the statute requiring 5 years. But in the case of G-Force, the borrower agrees to maintain its business operations within the city of Rushford for a minimum of 10 years after the date of this agreement or the termination date, whichever is later. Yes.
It's a 5-year loan,
It's a 5-year loan, right?
so if it's paid off after 5 years, is there any leverage to keep them here for 10?
I think it's a moot point in my mind, if we've got our money back and.
Yeah, I don't see how we can keep them here if they decide to go.
It was their wish, I guess.
Well, I hope they stay for 20,
Yeah.
25 years, but I think once we've got our money back, that we've got no leverage.
And I think we'd find that it'd be awfully difficult to expect them to continue to report to do that type of thing. Joyce, the jobs that are created, the 8 jobs, they are created within this year, or by
It's required within 2 years.
Within 2 years.
But I think